In today's cross-shield video, we're going to be converting Hags from D&D into usable adversary stat blocks for Daggerheart, DC20, and Fabula Ultima. So let's get into it.
Happy Halloween!
In today's part 1 of the Hag conversion, we are going to be converting the Sea Hag, the Green Hag, and the Night Hag. If you are here for the DC20 and the Fabula Ultima conversion, go ahead and check out the chapters below. Mark's got you covered for those two. But if you're here for Daggerheart, we're going to get right into the Sea Hag. Alright, so for the Sea Hag, this is going to be a tier 1 Skulk type adversary. It's got a difficulty of 11, thresholds are 7 and 15, with 3 HP, 2 stress, a +1 attack bonus, and then claws melee 1d6 plus 1 physical damage. Now for its features, it's got Horrid Visage, and this is going to be a passive here, so the Sea Hag's true form can be seen within close range. When a creature enters close range and can see the Hag, they must make an instinct roll of 15. Okay? Instinct reaction roll of 15, or become terrified. Terrified creatures must make every effort to escape. The target can spend 2 hope to shake the fear and be able to get right back into the fight. So this is something that we want to really leverage, especially as the Hag. So the Sea Hag's going to try and get into the fight and get into the middle of the party as much as possible because of this, and seeing who can basically get terrified because of this, all right? So love that, because they want to be able to leverage their next feature, which is going to be Stare Daggers, and this is going to be an action. So the Hag can spend 2 fear to stare daggers at the terrified creature within close range. When she does, if the target has 2 HP or less, they must make a death move. If they have 2 or more HP, the target takes 1d4 plus 3 magic damage. Now I know that doesn't seem like a lot for the Sea Hag, but the thing is we're going to be leveraging other features that we have kind of on a list, a particular spell feature list, if you will, that we want to utilize and bring on, so that way it's very much so contextually based, and this way it gives you a little bit more room to maneuver, okay? So that's why we have the stat block the way that it is, so that way we can tag something on top if we really want to. Maybe there's something that's that makes a little more sense that we want to bring in conjunction with these two, so that way the Sea Hag has a little bit more going on than just these 2 features. But as far as converting it over from D&D, this makes the most sense to do, and then you can just add a little bit more on top, and it's still going to be a fairly easy adversary for the players to deal with, albeit a little bit troublesome, especially with that terrified sort of condition. Now getting into the Green Hag, this is also going to be a tier 1 Skulk type adversary, except this difficulty is going to be 13, thresholds are 8 and 16, HP is 4, stress is 5, attack bonus plus 3, and then you have the claws melee again with the 1d6, but it's plus 3 physical damage this time. Now for the features, we've got Bitter Curse as an action. So you can spend a fear to temporarily curse a target within close range. While cursed, the target must mark a stress to take any action. And then we got Wicked Cloak. This is going to be an action as well. Mark a stress to become temporarily invisible. While invisible, the Hag is considered hidden and gains advantage on her next attack. Once she attacks, she becomes visible again. However, you may spend a fear to keep her from becoming visible. So that way she just kind of maintains this cloak and keeps going around and being able to do these attacks. This is obviously going to be fairly difficult for the player. So this is just in case if this Hag is on her own and doesn't have her coven with her to be able to do this kind of stuff, to be able to do more than that. And again, 2 features, can take from the spell feature list, which we'll get into here in a second. And you can add in some fun spells outside of having the Wicked Cloak being the invisibility spell, basically, and then Bitter Curse. So if you want to add something else on top of it, there are other ways of going about it. You can, of course, give her a weapon that then is, let's say, a wand, and then it's, close range or far range, and you can still keep it with the same damage type, but you can just extend it and just give it a quick reason without having to actually make that look like that in the actual stat block itself, okay? Looking at the Night Hag, we got ourselves a tier 2 solo type adversary. They're just aren't enough solo type adversaries within Daggerheart at the moment, so I try to find any moment that I can to get a good solo type adversary. We've already got a couple of bruisers, which you'll see here in the part 2 of the Hags conversion, but solo made the most sense for the Night Hag by comparison to any of the other ones, and you'll see why here in a second, because we got ourselves a difficulty 16, thresholds 18 and 32, HP is going to be 6, stress is 4, attack modifiers plus 2, with claws melee 2d6 plus 3 physical damage. For the features, though, We got a lengthy feature list, but it's not all that complicated. I'm trying to keep it within Daggerheart's mindset of staying rules light, yet crunchy enough, right? So we've got Soul Jar. This is a passive. At the start of an encounter, or if you've been building this into the campaign slowly but surely, she probably already has all 5 souls that you can possibly have with this feature, right? But if you are just introducing it out of nowhere, then at the start of the encounter, spend a number of fear to fill the Hag's Soul Jar with that many souls. And again, it can hold up to 5. So it's enough to work with to start with, and then you can slowly fill that as she starts to harvest from the players, okay? Now, she's not completely without the ability to harvest souls, though. That's the thing, is that you're not just stuck with that. And after you kind of start the encounter, obviously you're not going to be able to just keep throwing fear into it as if she's like generating more souls. She then has to harvest those souls, right? So that's the main point there, but the way she can use them is with Soul Blast. Soul Blast is an action, and you can spend 1 soul to make an attack roll to target a creature within far range. On a success, you deal 2d8 plus 10 magic damage. I know it seems like a lot of damage, but she is a solo after all, so we want the damage to match for what a solo is. We want her to be terrifying on the battlefield, okay? Then we got Dream Haunting. Dream Haunting is an action where you get to spend a fear to deal 2 hit points to a target that is magically asleep. If the target would mark their last hit point, their soul is harvested by the Night Hag. This is where she's going to be able to generate that. Now, this doesn't have to be the players, especially if the players have allies or they have minions on their side. Maybe they have conscripts following them for whatever reason, guards, what have you. They're probably bringing those, allies with them to hunt down this hag at some point, perhaps, maybe, right? If that happens, this is a good way to do that, because the only way that you can actually do this with the Dream Haunting, the only way you can do this is with Sleep Song. Sleep Song, you can spend 2 fear to force all targets within far range to make a strength reaction roll. The whole point of this is basically for them to physically resist being put magically asleep, okay? So on a failure, the target falls into a magical sleep. Those magically asleep can only be woken by a strength roll 18. We want it to be very difficult because it is a magical sleep. We want it to be very difficult to get these people up, or by a spell that can end magical effects. And I'm thinking of like the Codex spells where you can actually, end the magical effect, whatever that is going on. You can do that with a lot of those spells. So that way, hopefully players are starting to build their arsenal a little bit better, so as they go, they might have, they might find a reason to actually use some of those spells that they might not otherwise get to use that often. But that is Sleep Song, so you can see how these kind of build into each other for a lot of these features. You can't really do one without the other almost, so this really forces you as a GM to actually utilize all of them at the exact same time, however much you possibly can. So the player should see her going from whoever might be asleep, from person to person to try and harvest, okay? Now you can also see how she's not completely impossible to kill, how she's not the hardest to deal with if they manage things correctly, if they're a little bit more tactical about how they go about these things, how they deal with this particular situation. However, this Night Hag in a coven is going to be pretty solid. She's going to be pretty deadly. So that's where we're going to make that more of like a tier 3 situation, okay? But we'll get into that in the next video. We'll talk Coven Magic in part 2, okay? But for the last feature for this Night Hag, we've got Protected. And this is a passive. The Night Hag has resistance to magic damage. Additionally, the Hag ignores any magic attack that would deal minor damage. This way we can show that she has a little bit of protection to her, that she is protected from magic in general. Not only being resistant and having that magic damage, but also being able to completely negate it if it falls below her minor threshold, which being at an 18 and 32 could happen more often than not, okay? So that is something that you want to keep in mind if you do bring in the Night Hag. Now my suggestion is to create a spell feature list. This is something that I use myself to enable my hags to do that much more, okay? So having this spell feature list allows me to basically take 1 or 2 spells and add it to the stat block for that particular hag that I want to have those spells for, right? I'm not giving them all the spells in the world, I'm just giving them 1, maybe 2, something that feels on brand for that hag in particular. But having this spell feature list gives me a whole host of potential features that kind of create a nice theme, not just what the hag is, but also what the hag can do, right? So we want to be able to do that. So, bringing in like a Ray of Sickness type spell feature, or even a Hold Person almost. Something to that effect is going to help enable our hags that much more. A Disguise Self kind of thing, even though, you could just say that they do it. But you could make it to where maybe not a Disguise Self in its entirety, but, like a Mass Suggestion or whatever. You could bring those kinds of things in a nice list, and then that can be used in the Coven environment, which we do get into part 2. So look out for that one if you want that Coven magic sort of environment, because we do make it a full-on environment, okay? I had to go that route because I thought that was probably the better way to go about it, because how often are hags going to be together? And they might not always be in the same room. Even though they have their Coven ability, they may not be there the entire time. So therefore, I felt like it constituted a full-on environment, which you will see in part 2, because let's face it, we go through quite a few things that are possible, and then I'm going to give you some ideas on what you can do with those features to kind of swap some stuff out. But for the spell feature list, that will be necessary for that particular Coven magic environment, because then this way, your hags are going to be able to have access to a lot of different spells because of that. So yeah, but anywho, create a spell feature list. This is going to help you out so much, especially later down the line when you want to bring in other adversaries and you already have a spell feature list. This is just going to allow you to take some of those things and add it to other adversaries, not just hags, but other casting adversaries. And then you can just swap it up, especially for like a war wizard. Maybe you don't want the war wizard to have all the features that they currently have, and you want to, tailor something else on top or replace a lot of those. And then that way you can get that context that you want, that sort of vibe and theme that we're looking for sometimes that we don't always get, especially if you want something that's a little more electric based or blood magic based. Spell feature list is going to help you out a lot. But that is it for the part 1 for the Daggerheart Hags. If you want to see the DC20 and the Fabula Ultima, just keep going, because Mark's got you covered.
Before I start, I would like to put a note out there that as of June 2025, the monthly magazine released covered a new bestiary, and with that, new rules for how to create monsters. This also comes with recent changes in DC20 to the way defenses work. Now, I am using an older tool here, so you will still see some references of older terminology, and I do apologize for that, but I'll try to call it out as I talk through this. First up, we're going to talk about the Sea Hag. This is going to be a medium fey creature, and I've decided to make this a level 2 controller. Since this is kind of the lower threat of the hags, if you will, I made this one the lowest level. Now here you have the HP, the PD, and again, MD is now AD for area defense. But these are all coming from the new chart from the monthly publication of the bestiary. We again have your statistics here for your attributes, and then also if it has a parentheses, that means that it has a save in that attribute. This Sea Hag is going to have a dark vision of 12 spaces, and also speaks languages that are common and giant, so use that as you can in your campaigns or play sessions. More importantly, this has amphibious as one of its features, so it can breathe air and water, so this could be a nice little underwater combat scenario. But also keeping the horrific appearance. Any humanoid that starts its turn within 6 spaces of the hag and can see it for its true identity must make a repeated mental save. Now, if it succeeds, then it's pretty much immune to this condition for the next 24 hours. However, if it fails, then the PC becomes frightened, which plays into more of this creature a little bit later. However, first I did want to talk about Coven magic. You're going to see this in this video for the Sea Hag, the Green Hag, and the Night Hag. They all have Coven magic, which works in the same way, but a little bit unique to each one. So for the Sea Hag, it just gives it access whenever it's within 10 spaces of another hag. It can access its Coven magic to use the Find Familiar spell. And right after this stat block, I'll show you the Find Familiar specific to the Sea Hag. However, this is going to have 4 actions. It's got your 4 attack, 14 DC, speed 5. You can see all that there. And for its main attack, it's going to be using Claw, which is a melee with 2 slashing damage. The average damage that this creature will do is based off of that new bestiary chart. And we also brought in the other effect for the Sea Hag, which is Death Glare. Now, this is MP effect, but the these creatures don't really have mana points. It's more of just a way to keep yourself limited to how many times you can use this. So you could say, hey, I'm going to give this creature 2 MP and know that in your head, so that when you activate the Death Glare, you're not just doing it endlessly. You're going to have some limit based on the playstyle, and also this is a level 2 creature, so you're not going to have just endless amounts of mana points. And what this does is this allows the Hag to target a specific creature within 6 spaces that is frightened. So going back into that horrific appearance, let's say that everyone got affected by that, that leaves this creature's ability to do the Death Glare wide open for any player character on the table. However, if people made a save against that, obviously you cannot use Death Glare against them. Though this is a very deadly effect, because let's say that your player character is either bloodied or well bloodied. Basically, if they're under 50% or 25% of their maximum HP, then they're super vulnerable to this Death Glare. What this does is immediately place them on death's door, so it takes away whatever that remaining HP is. If your player character had 10 HP and they were at 5 when you use Death Glare, it does 5 damage. It takes them right to death's door if they are bloodied or well bloodied. If they are not either of those, then it just does 3 damage, which again is kind of the average, but a little bit higher, just to make it feel like a powerful effect is happening from this Death Glare. And then I did choose to give the Sea Hag attack enhancement for Dazed, which just makes player characters have disadvantage on mental checks. Again, I want this to be deadly but also easy to deal with. So if this is just the one Hag that the party is facing, probably not going to be too hard to dispatch them if you have a 2 or 3 player character group. However, if you have 2 Sea Hags, this might be a little bit deadly because they're both doing horrific appearance, they're both doing Death Glares. You're not likely going to walk into a den of Hags and there's only going to be 1 Sea Hag sitting around, right? They're usually more around. Now, whether they are around at the time or not is really just depends on the flow and how you're going to use them as a game master to make this Sea Hag a threat to the party. Now next we're going to go to the Find Familiar specific to the Sea Hag. I thought it would be a cool idea to give this like a siren type effect, right? Now I'm not picturing like a full-on mermaid siren. I'm picturing like a small nymph or fairy or something of a small size that is singing or vocalizing a song, and thus making them a siren. Now, this uses all the same mechanics from the Find Familiar spell as do the ones that you'll see in the future with the next 2 Hags. But basically it has a lot of shared things with the Hag itself, which I have listed there as shared. The important things to note here are shared telepathy, so the Hag can speak with its familiar. Also pocket dimension, so the Hag can choose to bring this familiar in and out of existence. And then shared senses, they can see through the eyes and hear through the familiar. So you could be wandering in a swamp and only see this siren, meaning that there would be at least 2 Sea Hags around because the familiar is out. So you could use it in that way to entice your group into, oh, you know, there's a smaller creature, let's investigate that. Next thing you know, they're getting ambushed by 2 Sea Hags. However, the important thing for the uniqueness of the Sea Hag, it has a familiar attack, which all of them do because they're going to be able to do their own attack, which is, again, based off the average chart from the bestiary. And I gave this one Siren Song. So for 2 actions, and again, all these actions are shared with the Sea Hag, so it's not like it has its own actions. But Siren Song, creatures within 5 spaces that can hear this familiar must make a repeated charisma save or become charmed by this familiar, which if they're charmed, they basically can't do any harmful actions towards this familiar. So really deadly if you use this as the initial way to lure a party group into an ambush of Sea Hags, or any Hags really. Next up we have the Green Hag. So this one's a slightly more powerful version of the Hag. Again, it's a medium fae. This time it's level 3 instead of level 2, and it's going to be a caster based on just the way that it works. We have all your same attributes there and defenses and whatnot. Again, MD is now area defense, AD. You have your languages here, which are Elvish and Fae. This also has Amphibious. It also has a different feature called Mimicry. So this is just what the Green Hag has. It can mimic sounds and things. So you make it really spooky of an environment for a player character to hear these mimicry sounds but not see anything. And then next thing you know, it's a hag or several. Again, Coven Magic, which gives it access to Find Familiar, which I'll go over after this stat block. Now, one of the things you will notice here, again, using that bestiary from the monthly magazine, level 3 means it's a little bit more powerful, so they actually get additional bonuses to their attack and their save DC. as well as their damage. Now, I say that, and then you immediately see that the claw attack only does 1 slashing. However, the idea with the green hag is that you're not just doing 1 claw attack and that's it. You're doing a claw attack with an enhancement of infected wounds, which if you skip down to the bottom here, you'll see that this will deal an additional 2 damage, meaning 3 flat, and they will make target will make a DC save, and if they fail, they become impaired. So the average damage here will be 3, or somewhere around 3. Could be a little bit less, a little bit higher. Also, we've given this hag invisibility, because that's what it has in D&D. However, tweaked it a little bit so that basically this can be unseen for up to 1 minute. So this could be either before the combat happens or during the combat. It can go completely invisible and still be around the map somewhere. That's important when you see the familiar, but also for Sickening Bolt. This green hag can just vanish right through its invisibility and then either make a claw attack with infected wounds against a player character or use a Sickening Bolt out of nowhere, right? And that Sickening Bolt is just to, again, make a check against the PD of the target within 10 spaces, and they'll take 2 poison damage. However, they also make a save, and if they fail, they take additional 1 poison damage and become impaired. So you can see both attacks are adding impaired from this hag. Now we'll go to the Find Familiar for the green hag, which is a blight. So think of like a small tree-like creature with, made of wood and vines, things of that nature. So again, we have the same shared components there. We have shared telepathy, pocket dimension, shared senses, and we also have familiar attack, which works the same way as the previous hags Find Familiar. However, this uniqueness comes from tethering vines. So what this familiar is going to be doing is trying to lock people in place. And if you read there, tethering vines basically locks them into a certain radius. So they can still move within those, 3 spaces. However, they're kind of locked to that one area. So it kind of keeps them where they're at. That way the green hag can be going invisible and sneaking up on other people further away, or just planting someone there with their familiar and then sniping them with Sickening Bolts, right? So I thought that was pretty cool in a unique way. Now, imagine mixing the hags together. That could get kind of gnarly. And then last for this video, we're going to show you is the Night Hag. Again, kind of taking another step forward, right? So this is level 5 now. It's a medium fiend, no longer a fae, and it is also a caster in the way that it works. So you'll see here all the same attributes. Again, MD is area defense, AD now, and dark vision, 24 spaces. This one actually does have some resistances to both cold and fire, and also is immune to the charmed condition. It also speaks multiple languages, so common, fiendish, and elemental. The features here differ slightly from the other two, where this one doesn't have the amphibious thing. This has magical resistance, so it gets advantage on spell saves against spells and other magical effects, making this really resistant to a group of player characters that might be more heavy on the spellcaster side, right? This is the one they don't want to walk into. It also has a soul bag, so this is a independent item that this hag is carrying, which then, while it has this in its possession, gives it access to its Dream Eater attack, which we'll go over here in a bit. But the soul bag actually does have its own HP, AD, and PD as well. So player characters, if they know that or happen to target that, or even if they do an AoE effect, it will hit this bag, and then once the bag is gone, this hag does lose access to its Dream Eater ability. It also has Coven Magic, which gives it Find Familiar, which we'll go over right after this. You can again see there's another increase in the bonus to attack and the save DC, which 17 is pretty high. Again, DC20 and the way it works is more compacted, right? So level 5 is not like a D&D level 5, because the first 10 levels are kind of condensed down, because in DC20 you have 10 additional levels of prestige, which aren't out just yet, but that's the idea of it. So a level 5 character in DC20 is a lot stronger than a level 5 character in D&D 5e. I just want to throw that out there. Again, here we have the claw, which again, this does a little bit more damage, 4 slashing, again, based off of the chart from the bestiary. And then we have Dream Eater. So what this does is the target must make a spell save DC, right? Again, the DC is 17, so it is a little bit high. And if they fail, they immediately enter a dream state and become incapacitated until the start of this hag's next turn. So you're basically losing 1 full turn off of this player character that gets hit by this. And this allows the hag to deliver a message of up to 10 words and deal 5 psychic damage to that player character. So definitely a really cool way to, I think, bring this hag in. It can actually incapacitate someone, and it's like in its mind, you know, whispering into its dreams, torturing thoughts, or it could be saying anything at once, which makes this really spooky, creepy, funny, whatever you want it to be. And then also we have magic missiles, which works just like the spell does. You can pump more actions in there for more magic missiles. So I believe this could shoot up to, 4 magic missiles by default, and then depending on your success by 5, even more than that, and each one doing 1 damage. So this could do anywhere from 4 to probably 6 or even 7 potential damage, which does seem a little high, but that's what you're working with here with this hag. Now last, we have the Find Familiar for that hag. Again, going over the same stuff, so I'll just skip right down to the bottom, but this familiar is going to be an imp. I thought that fit very well for the Night Hag, as they're more fiendish and, you know, demonic in a sense. So the imp just seemed like a good fit. Now what the imp has is Chameleon. This gives it the ability to go invisible for 1 minute, unless it takes an action, dodges or hides, etc. So this familiar can just be there or not be there, and it can just lay out these attacks just like the other familiars do. However, this is more of your, you know, harder to keep up with familiar because it's blipping in and out. Again, it's going to take your action points to do that. So again, if you're doing a magic missile and pumping all 4 of your actions, and you're not going to be able to do anything with this familiar, but that's how it keeps the magic missile not from being pumped like that every time, because you're going to have a lot of options here with this hag and the Find Familiar as well. So I hope you like these hags. I thought it was pretty cool to bring each unique familiar in, because each hag is unique in its own way, and I thought that was just a better way to highlight them and capture them. The original Coven Magic property in D&D comes with a lot more spells that aren't necessarily translatable in DC20 at the moment, so the coolest way I thought to do that was just to make the familiar itself more unique and make that the kind of primary component of the Coven Magic. In a sense, you're not able to bring your familiar out if you're a hag by yourself, because you're less powerful. But if you have multiple hags around you, your magic is increasing. You now have access to these additional spells, such as bringing out this whole other creature to be unique and fight in its own way for whichever hag you are using.
All right, in honor of Halloween week, we wanted to wrap in another system just to give you guys a little bit extra, and this we're going to be doing Fabula Ultima. So for the Sea Hag, this is going to be a level 5 adversary. Now in Fabula Ultima, you start at level 5, so this is one of the first adversaries you might encounter, or could be. Important thing to note here in this system is the typical traits. Now these are a good way for the game master to roleplay that adversary. So here we have a jealous, deceitful, cruel, and creepy Sea Hag, and there's a little bit of differences between the hags, so just pay special attention to that note. Jumping right into the attributes, we're going to start with a D8 in Dexterity, a D6 in Insight, and spoiler alert, the D6 in Insight is going to be across all the hags, and that is for a reason you will see at the end of the next video, so stay tuned and keep an eye out for that one. The Might here is a D10. That does seem a little strong, especially for a entry-level adversary. However, when doing the conversion from Dungeons & Dragons, Might captures Constitution in it as well, and so that's why it's a little bit higher here. And then Willpower, it's going to be a D6, just because, again, entry-level monster. For the hit points, they're going to have 55. That 28 there is what's called Crisis Mode, so that's half of their hit points. And some adversaries have things where they trigger extra effects when they're in Crisis Mode, so that's why you see 2 numbers there. The Mind points, not mana points, are 35. That's based off of the willpower and some other factors, your level, etc. However, that's a pretty solid amount at level 5. And then the Initiative is that next block, which is a 6. This is, again, just going to be that slower to act adversary as your players are learning the system. Next, you have the Defense Plus and Magic Defense. So for defense, it's based off of your Dexterity die, so it's automatically a D8 for this adversary. It says +0 because there's a couple different ways you can do the defenses in this system. For example, if that said Defense 11, even though the Dexterity is a D8, the defense number would take over. Also, if that was a defense +3, you would add 3 to whatever the Dexterity dice is. So a little bit of a nuance there. Same thing with magic defense, except that's playing more into your insight die. So this, for example, they have a D6, but it's +1, so their magical defense is a 7. Any kind of magical attack you're throwing at them, 7 is the number that you'll need to beat. Then we have a little bit of a category there for resistances, vulnerabilities, etc. And those all mean something different. As we go through the stat blocks, you'll see, but all of the hags have 1 or 2 resistances, and they may not make the most sense, but they do make sense in the long run. Again, stick around for the end of the other video where I'll explain kind of how why we chose to give them the resistances we did and how that compiles together into something a little bit more unique. Now for this one, it has the basic attack of Claw. So this is just your dexterity and your might die. You're going to roll those together, and then you're going to see if you beat the check. So if this is a D8 for defense, you roll your dex and might die, which is a D8 and a D10. You just have to beat the number of 8. And then whatever the higher roll is, so if you roll an 8 and a 4, that higher number, the 8, is what you're going to add into 5 for this physical damage. So 8 plus 5, 13 physical damage from this claw attack, as an example. Next up, we have spells. Felt it was perfect to give the Sea Hag a spell that already existed in the system. I didn't want to create something more unique, and this captures it pretty well. So this is Hallucination. It's insight and willpower based magical attack. It costs 5 mind points per target, and you can select up to 3 targets. So anywhere from 5 to 15 mind points and 1 to 3 targets for this spell. What this does is allow you to choose either Dazed or Shaken and inflict that on each of the targets that are hit by this spell. Again, you're rolling against their magical defense. And this causes them to experience frightening visions, and it was a good way to capture that kind of, disguise, horrifying appearance of the Sea Hag. And then the special rule we have here is what's called Coven Magic. This is why we've chosen to flatline the inside die to a D6 for all the hags. However, what this does is every other hag that is on the scene or in the combat encounter will give the other hags a plus 1 increased size to their inside die. So for example, if you have just this one Sea Hag alone, its inside die is a 6. But if you add another Sea Hag or a green hag or any kind of hag, any other hag, so you have 2 now they both have 1 die size increase, which would go from a D6 to a D8. So they both have D8. If you add a third hag, it goes up again. They all have a D10. A fourth hag, it all goes up D12. So you can see as the more hags, the stronger their coven magic. They're building up both their defenses against magical attacks and also their ability to cast magical attacks, because most magical attacks are based off of insight and willpower. So I hope you enjoyed that one. Next up, we're going to have the Green Hag. So a little bit of similarities here. We decided to keep this one also at level 5 just because of the way the progression works and the amount of hags we have. So this is pretty equivalent to the Sea Hag in that sense, though in the Dungeons & Dragons system they are slightly stronger. Again, here we have the typical traits of manipulative, cruel, hateful, and deceitful. So you can see there's 2 that are the same, cruel and deceitful, but this one's a hateful and manipulative adversary. So the GM can play this more in that stance. Just going over the attributes really quick now that you've kind of got the baseline. D6 in dexterity, D6 in insight, I've already explained why. D10 in might, again, same reason, because of the conversion. Their willpower, though, is a little bit stronger here just because they are supposed to be that more threatening adversary. Their HP is the same, but their mind points is a little bit higher, and also their initiative a little bit higher. You also note here that they have a slightly higher magical defense. That's just, again, a way to make it a little bit stronger, but it's really kind of on the same level. And then the resistances I've explained there. You're probably wondering, why does a green hag have resistance to bolt? But again, watch the next video for the end. You'll see kind of how I've compiled these monsters and why that makes sense in the end. For this one, the basic attack is Vanishing Strike. So it's, again, dexterity and might. You roll those, high roll plus 5 physical damage. However, to bring in the Green Hag's effect of being able to hide and go invisible and things like that, any creatures that are hit by this attack are unable to perform actions against the Hag. So there's no invisibility necessarily in the Fabula Ultima system, at least in the core rulebook. So I felt this was the best next way to kind of capture that same effect. If you effectively hit a player character with this move, they can't take any actions against you. It's kind of equivalent to being invisible, if you ask me, although it's obviously not. But I felt that was the best way to do that at this level. For the spells, we have Drain Spirit. Again, insight willpower. This one is only on 1 target, and it costs 5 mind points. The target loses high roll plus 15 mind points, and then the hag will recover mind points equal to half of that amount. So while this is their only spell, and they're probably not using a ton of mind points in that sense, this makes sense in the end later for the compiled effect that I'm going to be showing you. Special rules, Coven Magic, same effect, increase the insight die. And then next up we have the Night Hag. This is a level 10 monster, so a little bit more threatening. And the traits here are, it's a shapeshifter. It also shares that manipulative trait with the Green Hag. However, it has 2 new ones. It's corrupt, but it's patient. The Night Hag will wait. It will stalk and wait and attack when the time is right. Here for the attributes, we have D8 Dexterity, D6 Insight, D10 Might, D8 Willpower. Kind of all flatlined across the board, but it's the best way I could do it in the system. HP here is a little bit stronger, and the mind points again are a little bit higher. Initiative matches the Green Hag, but still threatening 8 is a good number unless player characters have something to beat it normally. And then on this one, again, the defenses are increased a little bit more, so you're always adding +1 to the defense and +2 to the magic defense, no matter what the die is. I didn't talk about this too much, but your die sizes can also be decreased. That's what those effects do. So Dazed and Shaken, for example, from the Sea Hag, they can actually reduce your dice. So if your dexterity dice goes down, so does your defense. Same thing for insight. If that goes down, so does your magical defense. So giving the adversaries the +2 option versus a flat number kind of helps them stay a little bit more sturdy, and you don't want them just falling apart because they got hit by something that made their dice go down. Here, this one only has resistance to poison. Felt like that made the most sense out of the 5 that we have and what we're doing with them in the end. And then for the claw attack here, basic attacks has a claw, dex plus might. However, you'll notice this also has a +4 to the chance to hit, essentially. So it's, a higher level monster. It's going to hit more often is the idea of that. And then the high roll is +10 versus the +5 you saw before. So higher chance to hit, higher damage that it is hitting. That's kind of how it, how it balances out. For spells here, we have Nightmare Haunting. And this is going to be Insight Willpower. It's 10 mind points now per target, up to 3. And this lasts for the whole scene. So in Fabula Ultima, the scene would be like the entire combat encounter. So as soon as you're done fighting this Night Hag, that effect ends. What this does is each target will suffer high roll +15 dark damage, but they will also suffer from enraged and poisoned, which again, both of those status conditions will affect the die size of the player characters, effectively making them weaker at either attacking or defending. So status effects are a big deal in this game, and there's only a few handfuls of ways to cure them off. And then again, we have the special rule, Coven Magic. That insight die going up with the more hags and increasing the Coven Magic is a really cool effect. So hope you appreciated that. Stay tuned for the next video a little bit later this week, where we'll cover the remaining 2 hags. Well, 3, because I've got a special one that I'm going to put in there. Until next time, keep that shield wall strong.
Happy Halloween.